attending the Strengthening Families Networking webinar today, March 14th, 2024. And today is Putting Principles into Action, Building an Early Relational Ecosystem. About the Strengthening Families Networking webinars. So these are open to anyone who uses the Protective Factors framework and coordinates strengthening families' efforts. They are jointly convened by the Center for the Study of Social Policy, CSSP, and the Children's Trust Fund Alliance. Topics and guest speakers are coordinated by CSSP and the Alliance. So volunteers and suggestions are always welcome. Feel free to reach out to Cailin or myself. Recordings and materials from past webinars are posted at this link right here, which we will put in the chat. They are archived on the Alliance website, and you will also be able to reach the webinar recording from today on that same link. And I think it just takes a few days to get up there. Upcoming webinars, in April 11th, we have the Authentic Fatherhood Partnerships. Webinars are always the same time, starting at 3 o'clock Eastern time. On May 29th, we have a special event, the Virtual Strengthening Families Mini Summit, which we're really excited about. And you may have seen a few other times listed, but we had to move that around a little bit. So this is the final date, May 29th, Virtual Strengthening Families Mini Summit. And that will be from 12 noon to 4:30 p.m. Eastern time. And our upcoming webinars on June 13th and July 11th are topics to be announced. Again, if you have anything that you would like to volunteer for or a topic that you would like to hear about, please reach out to myself, Maureen Holliker, or Cailin. In order to get the invitations every time for these webinars, you can subscribe to CSSP's Strengthening Families newsletter. And you will get the invite registration and also other news from CSSP. Please also check the chat box. Cailin's putting information in there on how to request a certificate, and you'll be able to see other registration links. So our plan for today, putting principles into action, building an early relational health ecosystem. Welcome to all of our speakers that we have today. I'll let you all introduce yourselves. And at the end of our presentation, we will have updates from Cailin and updates from myself on our organizations. But welcome to you all, and let's get started. Cailin, I'll hand it over to you.
Great, thank you so much. So I'll just quickly introduce our team. We are all the co-authors of a paper that we're going to talk about today and will be released soon on CSSP's website. So our rockstar team of authors is Charlyn Harper Browne, who's a senior fellow at CSSP, Junlei Li, who is the Salzanes Senior Lecturer in Early Childhood Education and the Faculty Co-Chair of Human Development and Education Program at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Myself, Senior Associate at CSSP, Jenna Russo, who's a PhD candidate in clinical psychology at Mississippi State University, and David Willis, who's a Senior Fellow at CSSP. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to David to tell us a little bit about early relational health and get us into talking about this new report.
Thanks so much, Cailin, and welcome everybody. We're excited that you're interested in this new paper that we've together constructed and bring to all of you. Let me just first comment about reminding people that early relational health, it's a paradigm that integrates science-based and experience-informed ideas, values, and practices, which elevate the significance of the earliest parent-child relationship and the importance of all of those relational moments to promote healthy development and well-being. You know, it's not really a new idea. It's grounded and reflects decades of research in infant and early childhood mental health, pediatrics, neuroscience, developmental sciences, professional practice from across multiple disciplines and professional sectors, and the experiences and the insights of generations of parents, caregivers from diverse cultures, as well as all those helping professionals that help young families. But what is new is intentionally integrating the breadth and the rigor of cross-disciplinary academic scholarship and the richness and the depth of cross-cultural wisdom and experiences. In that way, it's a shift of paradigm that brings expanded opportunities for policymakers, advocates, practitioners, researchers to really incorporate these relational principles into the design of early relational health promoting ecosystems, including, importantly, those everyday routines and specialized practice. This report, outlines really actionable implications of what you'll hear about of 10 foundational principles. We really built this paper and the concepts herein as being principally as a principle-based approach to develop and grow an early relational health ecosystem, rather than building one around the identification and implementation of the fidelity of evidence-based programs. Evidence-based programs are really important, but there's a lot more that we've come to understand about the importance of preserving the integrity of so many of enduring principles that are grounded both in science and experiences. And that's formed how we came to think through and bring forth the principles that you're going to hear about. So this project and then this paper is developing an integrity-based approach to those places where trusted efforts by practitioners and families can really apply these principles to their specific circumstances and needs to advance this early relational health ecosystem. So maybe we can get started in that kind of dialogue and what's founded and captured in this new report. Jenna, can I come to you?
Sure. Thanks, David. So as you had mentioned, early relational health isn't any new idea. What's new is the integration of rigorous cross-disciplinary research and rich cross-cultural wisdom and experiences, really offering, as you had mentioned, these expanded opportunities for policymakers and practitioners, researchers, to all incorporate relational principles into early health promoting ecosystems, including those everyday practices and routines. And so, as you were saying, that's really why we developed this paper, to deepen understanding of what early relational health is, to describe the principles of the ERH paradigm, and really offer examples of practice that align or may need to be adapted to align with the paradigm. And so, like you were saying, this principle or this paper is really, a practical guide, not just to inform, but to be used to help shape existing and new research, program design, practice, and decision-making across the early childhood ecosystem to promote early relational health. And so in this paper, we offer a principle-based approach that, as David mentioned, is really focused less on adhering to exact details and more on identifying what matters most to nurturing social emotional development and well-being, really placing trust in practitioners and families to apply these well-grounded principles while also accommodating their local needs and circumstances. And so, speaking of those principles, this paper outlines the actionable implications of 10 foundational principles of the early relational health paradigm. And so we'll focus our conversation today on how we arrived at these principles, how they group together. But to get us started, I'd like to first just share them with all of you, beginning with principle 1. Nurturing caregiver-child interactions to establish strong, meaningful, and enduring or consistent relationships and provide immediate and long-term benefits for both young children and their caregivers. We've also got principle 2, simple and everyday human interactions are good enough early relational experiences. 3, research and practice are strengthened by integrating family experience and cultural wisdom into the science of early childhood development. 4, connectedness, belonging, and mattering are essential for parents. 5, the early relational health paradigm emphasizes the strengths and resources of parents and young children. And then we've got principle 6, a social ecological perspective enables a comprehensive focus on conditions, circumstances, and characteristics that advance or impede early relational health. 7, a broad range of helping professionals and community members can provide experiences which promote early relational health. 8, collaborative decision-making and power sharing between families and early relational health professionals can lead to better outcomes for children and parents. 9, early relational health embraces diversity of practices and knowledges and resists reductionism about human development. And finally, principle number 10, a society built on respectful and equitable relationships is a society in which all young children and their families can thrive. Now, how we arrived at these principles has been a journey in and of itself, to be discussed among all of our authors. So Charlyn, I believe I'm passing the mic to you. Would you like to kick us off?
Thank you, Jenna and David, for the introduction to this. We want to use the bulk of our time today to share our thinking about behind this set of principles. We've engaged in our team, this illustrious team has engaged in a series of conversations as we worked on the report and pushed back and looked at and revisited how we would say things based on our own different perspectives, and getting feedback from others too along the way as we shaped the paper right up to the end. So we're really, really pleased to have this opportunity to share this with you and to get some feedback from you. So we also encourage you to put questions or comments that you may have after we go through the 10 principles, and we will turn to those comments and questions at the end. So first I will invite Junlei, our colleague Junlei, to talk about the first 2 principles and what they mean. These 2 principles are really at the heart of the work that you are engaged in, and you were the strongest voice in shaping them. So can you talk about the importance of nurturing relationships and the effect that they have on both children and adults, and what you have referred to in your work as simple interactions that are sufficient for building early relational health? Junlei?
Thank you, Charlyn. I think one of the things when we discuss these 2 principles, as well as the overall early relational health frame, is kind of why do we have to say relationship again when early relationship has been perhaps the most enduring, the oldest idea in the work of early childhood. And I think part of the downside of being the oldest idea in early childhood is that we say it so often that we take it for granted, and that it doesn't kind of become real into the practices and policies. So this idea about thinking about how relationship and interactions have kind of powerful impacts on children and on caregivers and adults in the immediate now, right, as well as into the future, is foundational to think about our work in early childhood. In early childhood in particular, we've relied a lot on, for example, the return on investment kind of frame to talk about it. Return on investment is something that happens, let's say 10 years, 20 years, or even 40 years after. That's valuable. But so often in early relational health, in these interactions, the impact on adult and children's brain and physiology and heart rate is immediate. It's something that is so important right here and now, right? So doing what is right here and now is very much what that principle is about. And sometimes the key word in that principle is the word "and." I think we talk so often about the need to care for children and adults because early relational health is about that. But so often we communicate programs, particularly for families, in such a way that almost make parents sound like they're the means to the end. That if you do this, your child will be well. But what about you? And I think focusing on principle 1 is just to remind all of us not to take this foundational idea for granted just because it's the oldest idea in our work. The second part that was so important is that if we keep talking about the importance of relationship, but we do not articulate a kind of relationship that is culturally responsive, that conveys a sense of good enough, then we're setting up this kind of unreasonable standard of some perfect idealistic relationship out there that's detached from everyday experiences that people have. I noticed in the chat earlier, Dr. Andrew Garner joined in, who co-authored the American Academy of Pediatrics report on relational health, and then Dr. Claudia Gold, who co-authored with Ed Tronick a book called The Power of Discord. And both of them actually reminded us in the development of this report about this idea of how do you convey that relationships doesn't have to be perfect. There are moments of disconnects, and there are moments of repair, and there are moments of reconnect, and that what we need are these genuine, authentic human relationships that seem to express themselves in a variety of different ways. And that we're not expecting parents anywhere, right? To, for example, when we talk about serve and return interactions, you must return 100% of the serves that come from children. None of us do that, and children don't need us to do that. So just to be able to plant the seed about why is it so important that these relationships are authentic, real, very human, and that what happens day in and day out every single day between parents and children are what matters, and that we don't have to be perfect to be helpful in these relationships. So anyhow, those are, I think, at the heart of why we try to reiterate these first two principles. So Charlyn, I'm going to just turn this back to you. Your voice is so consistent throughout the whole writing process about the role of families and how we talk about families, how we engage families, and the roles that family ought to play in this entire work. And that, in the end, became our principles 3, 4, and 5. Can you talk a little bit about kind of the overall drive to put the family front and center in all this work, and how do principles 3 and 4 and 5 kind of add to that work?
Thank you. Absolutely. Principles 3, 4, and 5, to me, acknowledge that parents and caregivers are not just integral, not just important, but essential to our understanding of early relational health. And you will see throughout the paper that we talk about parents and caregivers. Parents are critical, absolutely critical, but it's also the other people in the child's sphere. And they also are essential. And this is more than just the presence of the parent, but everything about who these parents and caregivers are and what they bring to the interactions and relationships with young children. So their culture, their cultural beliefs and values, their own relationships and how they have been built. And that the parents' sense of connectedness, the parents' and caregivers' strengths, resources, even problems that they bring into the interactions and relationships, and how they have responded to the challenges that they face, the identities that they bring into this relationship, and the various different ways of knowing, thinking about, and responding to children. So all of that is a part of who parents are, who caregivers are, and what they bring, and the impact that all of that will have on their relationship with the young children that they are in front of. Also, our third principle. And so our third principle emphasizes the importance of integrating family experience and cultural wisdom into the science of early childhood development, because parents bring all of that to the relationship. And so we say that it is important not only in practice, but in research and program development to recognize, appreciate, and integrate diverse cultural wisdom about what children need and what families need to thrive. This means that although we believe that nurturing, attentive, responsive, reciprocal relationships and interactions are universal, that need for that is universal, in that all children, it's essential for the well-being of all children and their caregivers. These experiences, early relational health, the experiences that build early relational health may be understood and expressed in culturally diverse ways. And so we need to think about that and acknowledge that and incorporate that into our thinking and our practice and our policies as we work with families and of young children. Principle 4 acknowledges that relational health is bidirectional, as Junlei has already said, that it's not just about the early relational health for young children, but the relational health is also essential for parents and for their own well-being. And so practice related to promoting early relational health should include facilitating opportunities, helping parents to identify experiences that would help them to forge healthy, meaningful, trusting, and sustained relationships with people, with institutions, with the communities, and even with a higher power, how they define a higher power that would promote a sense of connectedness and belonging and mattering. And then the 5th principle focuses on the importance of helping parents to identify and mobilize their own strengths and resources, with the understanding that focusing on strength does not mean ignoring and minimizing or even denying an individual's pain, individual's challenging circumstances, or even the institutional and systemic factors that create and sustain inequities. Rather, a strength-based approach, which is what early relational health is, acknowledges that individuals' difficulties, acknowledges their difficulties and frames them as motivation and opportunities for positive change. And so all of this is about helping parents, elevating the role, the identity of parents and caregivers in this early relational health paradigm. And so that's the nature of principle 3, 4, and 5. And so now I'll turn to Cailin and ask Cailin to tell us about principle 6, 7, and 8, and touch on some of the work that we've been doing together for years related to the social ecological model and how it relates to this paradigm, and how early relational health is affected by community factors and all of that work. So I'll turn it over to Cailin.
Thanks, Charlyn. So I think this next sort of cluster of principles is really getting at the fact that while early relational health happens between a parent and a child, or between a child and the other adults they interact with, and peers as they get older, we really want to think about everything that's going on outside of that dyad that really can affect the early relational health. And so our Strengthening Families work and a lot of our other work is really grounded in the social ecological model, which tells us that the conditions and circumstances and characteristics around the family, whether that's the other relationships they have, the programs they participate in, and the cultural institutions they're a member of, and the societal norms around them and the policies, all of these things matter for the parent and child experience. And these things can either advance or impede early relational health. And we've always talked about that in like this sort of general sense, but when we get into early relational health, we think about the things that Charlyn just mentioned about the parent's social connections mattering, and about valuing the wisdom of the family that they're bringing in, rather than just going with the sort of cultural norms that might be in conflict with that, or not help providers to see those strengths. All of that comes down to that social ecological perspective. And so then principles 7 and 8 are really about the professionals in particular who work with families. Sometimes these professionals and other community members are in direct relationship with a child, and they have opportunities to engage in those same simple interactions that Junlei was talking about, and to build positive relationships and relational health with that child. Sometimes they're interacting with the parent, and they can promote that parent's ability to connect to their child in that way. They can help a parent to identify those strengths and resources. They can just be a cheerleader for a parent by saying, hey, I saw how you did that. That was great, and help the parent to do more of that with their child. There's a lot of roles that helping professionals can play, and there's no limit on who could be in that role. We think of the childcare provider, the pediatrician, the home visitor, but it's also the bus driver and the clerk at the grocery store and the librarian who does story hour. All of those people have a role to play in supporting children's healthy development, but also supporting that dyadic relationship. And then in Principle 8, we really talk about shifting power within those relationships so that parents are experiencing this collaborative decision-making and a sense of shared power with the professionals that they interact with, because that is going to allow the parents to do what they need to do to build early relational health with their child in the way that aligns with their culture and their values, that builds on their strengths and helps them overcome their challenges, rather than just a kind of cookie cutter approach that would come from, here's a checklist of the things you need to do. And it doesn't matter that it's based on research by and about families that look nothing like yours 100 years ago. This is the list. This is what you do, but really much more collaborative approach. So it's my turn to turn the mic over next to David. We went back and forth on Principle 9. This is, I think, one of the most interesting principles here. And it's really about reductionism. And so you were really the voice pushing for this principle and the importance of it. And so can you talk about what you mean by reductionism and how we make this principle actionable and what that looks like out in the world too?
Yeah, thanks. And it's been such fun to be with my friends exploring and thinking through all these principles together. And I have been a gadfly about the importance of, embracing complexity and having the humble sense of not really fully understanding how human development moves forward, and the richness of learning, an ever expanded effort around in neurodevelopment, experiential learning, relational learnings, cultural learnings, contextual learnings, historical learnings, cross-cultural elements, and even spiritual elements. My point is, human development's incredibly complex. It's beautiful. There's a tapestry of learnings and knowledge. It's evolutionarily valuable and important. And to try to imagine that we can reduce into some simple principles or some simple guidance or how-to, or to make cookbook guidance as to activities, take the complexity of human development into trying to reduce it into specific guidance. And I would almost argue some of the audacity to suggest what has to be specific. Now we know, how you can make human development difficult. We understand that. But the mechanisms of human development's evolution to its richness of capacity and emerging strengths and breadth, there's a lot to learn. And you ask any one of our neuroscientists and our mental health colleagues and our neurodevelopmental people and the like, how much we still have to learn and to embrace. They would all be humbled by what we don't know and curious about what is to learn. When we have conversations with grandparents, culture groups, and the like, many would say, well, it just happens. But it's more to that, and all of us scientists are curious of the mechanisms and the patterns. And so this principle is to honor the complexity of learning and honoring the curiosity of discovery, and also bringing our academic researchers into really exploring far beyond deficit-based theories and thinking, theory-based driven understandings, and really small studies that become generalized to truths or efforts about human development, really, and also the dominant cultural lenses that have been used to interpret naturalistic patterns and developmental efforts. This model is about the broadening our listening, honoring the complexity of human development, and really opening up our mind to learn and explore collectively and together. One of the examples I think is most proximal is what is starting to emerge out of simply and complexly dyadic neuroscience, looking specifically with new tools into that synchrony, the neurosyncratic process, that every human element of human development and capacities, there's a synchrony of development that seems to be really one of the mechanisms, but it's far more complicated than that. And then also thinking about what are the natural healing relational forces that take place. That's all embraced in this concept of complexity. So let's talk about the interplay then of biology, social, relational experiences as they drive capacities moving forward. And let's not think just about evidence-based practices, nor think about cookbook efforts to guide families, but really think about that parallel process of being side by side with watching and learning and supporting and bringing the joy and the strength and the love and the care that one witnesses when sees relational patterns and evolution. That's the complexity here. So Charlyn, or Junlei, or Cailin, you want to make any comments about that complexity, or shall we go on to the next one?
I have to admit, David, that I was struggling with that one from the beginning, as you know, and your explanation just now has just further clarified that, and about the nature of the complexity of human development and not trying to reduce it to, these simple things. Our acknowledging that in among our principles continues to say that we know this is just the beginning of this understanding about early relational health, but it is a beginning. And and so there, we welcome, to me, it says that we welcome others to join the conversation, to see other principles that we need to add to this or to expand on. So I think that to me is part of that complexity, that it's always room for more thinking and more elaboration about these ideas. So we didn't reduce them down to 10. We just said this is where we'll start. This is a start. And it's not a recipe. That's what I like. That's what I really like. It's not a recipe of what to do. And we don't need to do that. We used to say at the beginning of Strengthening Families that it was an approach and not a model. And I think this is consistent with that, in that you can apply it in so many different contexts, in so many different ways, that we don't have to have a single recipe that you have to follow. But these are guidelines for building her early relational health. I think it might have been divine intervention that this morning I heard a song that I have heard a zillion times, but a line in it, as I was thinking about this webinar today, just absolutely just stood out for me. And it was Luther Vandross singing Dance with My Father. And there's a line where he talks about his relationship with his father, and about how important it was. Many times when he fell asleep on the sofa, his father would carry him up to the bedroom and put him in the bed. I thought about Junlei Li, a simple act of putting him in the bed. And the next line said, "And I knew for sure that I was loved." To me, that summarizes early relational health, the benefit of early relational health, that every child should know for sure that they are loved. So that's where I got out of your explanation about complexity. So thanks again.
Junlei, you want to add your thought on top, and then Cailin?
Well, David, I think all of us are glad that you pushed to include that principle, even over some of our earlier hesitations. But I think, to what Charlyn was saying, I think this one principle has real practical implications on our work with families and so on. And it reminded me of the kind of general disposition that anthropologists always had when they went around the world to study how caregiving and relationship are built all around the world in early childhood. And anthropologists have a general kind of professional disposition to describe, to understand, and to ask questions. And one of the things that anthropologists generally do not do is to prescribe to the places they visit what ought to be. And I think that difference between the curiosity to describe, to understand, and the impulse to prescribe is very well captured, I think, in this principle. And it has practical applications to every conversation that anyone have with families in the course of their professional work.
That's such a great reminder, Junlei. In my early years as a developmental pediatrician, as a developmentalist, assuming I understood human development, right? When I started reading anthropological literature, especially ethnology, as well as some of the early the early childhood cultural anthropologists, it knocked my socks off about wisdom at a whole nother level of thinking about how does human development flourish, separate from the weird cultures, right? Western culture view, but rather embracing of the beauty and the wisdom and the strength and the power of relational experience and no matter where people live. That was really humbling. And yet there's mechanisms of becoming human. And there's mechanisms involved that really matter in terms of how people enculturate, how they become connected, how they become empathic, how they develop their work ethic, their educational capacities, their spiritual beliefs, and their cultural passage from one generation to the next. It was incredibly humbling, and that exposed what we don't know, which is then the journey of learning and relational forces and patterns and experiences and context. And then generational wisdom becomes embedded into the next generation's strength. There's something really amazing to me about that, and wondrous and curious, that I don't want to lose track of in any of our principles. That's why I was such a gadfly pushing us all on that. Cailin, I'm going to lean in a little bit here. Do you want to add in one thought, or shall we go to principle 10?
No, go on. Yeah.
Right. Well, let me turn to principle 10, which focuses, of course, on equity. The desire to get to more equitable outcomes for children and families has been a driving force behind all of our early relational health work. We debated where in the list this one should fall in order to convey its centrality and its importance. And we ended up having it to round out all the other principles as final one on the list, not the least of which, but perhaps the penultimate importance of this for this good work. How about if we share insights into that ongoing conversation about equity and the paradigm? And Cailin, you want to start there, and then we can go to Junlei and then to Charlyn.
Sure. I'll jump in. I think we've been having this conversation about early relational health always with an intent of affecting those relationships between providers and parents in a way that would make more parents get the support they need from the providers they interact with. And we know that Black, Latina, Asian, Indigenous families are less likely to get that kind of support when they walk into a room with a provider, less likely to have those strengths recognized and be lifted up. And so a big piece of the early relational health work has been listening to parents about how they want those interactions to go so that it would be as supportive as possible. And I think we wanted to capture that not just in how the service providers interact, but with this whole need for a more equitable society where families wouldn't be facing all of these stressors that can make it harder to build early relational health with their children. And so I think I'll stop there and see who wants to jump in with a little more of our thinking there.
Jenna or Junlei?
One of the things I was thinking that was helpful about the early relational health framework that kind of connect together, right? All these different professionals in the early childhood field that Cailin was talking about earlier in this broader ecosystem. I think what is helpful is it gave us kind of given each of us or each sector kind of a pathway to build towards a more equitable world, right? Because sometimes when we talk about inequity, the systemic kind of economic, health, educational, and every kind of inequity, all these systems seems overwhelming to any one professional or any one professional sector. But each professional, each sector have within their influence and their power the opportunities to increase access to these relational opportunities, not just for children, but for the families, right? So every professional service is an opportunity to build yet another layer of protective relationships around the family, around the child. That part we could do, even as we collectively advocate, right, for broader system changes. But even within our little mini systems, within our program and services, each of us have the opportunity to strengthen that relational touch point. And every little relational touch point matters, right, within that broader ecosystem. So that to me is this beautiful connection between the early relational health work and the much larger systemic historical work on equity.
I would add in, when we talk about ecosystems, there's macro and there's micro, and there are micro ecosystems of strong relational support. One of our conversations, Charlyn and I so remember it, is that for some families that are stressed in the outside world, that in their community, in their families, those moments of being connected deeply with their young ones in a relational experience may be the most meaningful moment in their lives that actually in and of itself helps families manage the stress of the larger world. That really, that ecosystem relational health is meaningful to families, to young children, and to the communities within which they live, even though the wider world may be challenging and difficult and problematic. That jumped out to me about micro and macro ecosystem thinking around this early relational health space.
Absolutely. To build upon that, I would say that this principle really emphasized to me that early relational health is not something to be, solely pursued within families, or as you mentioned, Junlei, within a single sector. It warrants involvement from researchers, from policymakers, practitioners, all to come together and really prioritize and invest in efforts that allow all children and families and communities really the opportunity to thrive. And so, at the start, I talked a bit about how this approach we outline in the paper is a principle-based approach that's focused less on adhering to those exact details and more on really figuring out what matters most to nurturing social emotional development and well-being. And that can and likely will look different for each and every family and community. So with Principle 10, right, part of pursuing a society built on respectful and equitable relationships is really placing trust in practitioners and families to apply these principles while also accommodating their needs and circumstances, which only they can understand best. And so it's really that shift in power that's so important when it comes to programs and policies for children and families, rather than just assuming what might be needed, just ask and collaborate along the way. Otherwise, money and time and resources are oftentimes funneled towards fixing problems that are perhaps not even problems to begin with.
For me, this principle boils down to elevating humanity, elevating our humanity, and pulling that back out of people, and just trying to figure out ways that people see. One of the reasons that I get stuck, so to speak, at the individual level and the relational level of the social ecology is because those systems that are up here, this does go actually directly to what you were saying earlier, Junlei. Those systems are comprised of people who create and control these systems, and who bring into that creation and control various different ideologies that end up becoming a part of the systems, embedded in the system. So my wish is that we, that individuals work on themselves more, and individuals and in relationships get better, improve, so that when that the ideas that you lead with in creating and promoting and building communities and systems are related to your humanness, your humanity, what you want with other people. And so for me, that's why this number 10 is framed like it is, and why it is, David, the bedrock of everything else for us. So yeah, I love it. I do, yeah, and I hope for it. So Cailin, back to you. And opening up the questions.
Yeah, I think we will open up for questions from our participants. We have one already typed in the Q&A from Anna Doherty. So thank you for that. I will read this. She says it's more of an observation, but I think it gives us something to talk about. She says, everything I'm hearing here makes all the sense in the world to me and aligns with what we encourage all the time. However, as we know, the public school systems in this country often discourage teachers from working off mere approaches and encourage much more of a cookbook, cookie cutter teaching methodology. What are your thoughts on helping us all move this human development centered approach up in the spaces where our young children are frequently moving into in the public schools? Trust, creativity, flexibility, relationships, complexity, good enough, all needs to be fostered at all ages. So anyone have thoughts about that, sort of how we, whether it's teachers or other practitioners who are used to operating from more of a, a scripted curriculum or a evidence-based program, how we can help to shift that more towards principle-based work that responds to the complexity and each individual.
Junlei, that sounds like it's coming to you first.
Well, I think about my experience working with schools and public schools in particular, with teachers all the way to superintendents. And one of the things that I thought that was so important when we work with public school systems, where they themselves are under a tremendous amount of demand, right, and pressure from policy and from community, is to use something like early relational health, or just relational health in general, as a reminder. And one of the things that always struck me is that teachers, principals, superintendents, they're all educators at heart, and sometimes it helps to just have a reminder of where the heart of their work is, which is very similar to where the heart of the work of home visitors and pediatricians and so on. There's something about the public school system that sometimes separate or segregate the relational component from, let's say, the disciplinary component or the instructional component. So much so that, sometimes when we ask educators kind of, what does building relationship mean for you? They might say something like, why, I stand at the door of my classroom and I say hello to all my students one by one. That is certainly part of the relationship, but sometimes we almost think as if the relationship starts and ends at the door. And once you come in, curriculum and algebra and everything else comes in. But from the lens of the student, it seems so clear, right, that the relationship they have with their teachers continues inside that classroom, whether they're learning algebra, whether they're learning reading. And that relationship is like this beautiful thread that's woven and braided into everything else that happens in school. And it keeps everything together, or it makes everything fall apart if you pull that thread out. And at least in my experience, every educator, whether they're superintendents or whether they are a new teacher, deeply understand that at the heart of their work. And sometimes there's just so much pressure on their plate that they just needed that very human reminder through the work of professional development, learning, as well as communities of practice, so the educators can get together and talk very honestly with one another about where the heart of their work is.
So it makes me think about the integration of reflective practice into the teaching classroom, as all sectors were learning about under the pressures of their work, harden their hearts unless they have the moment to express their humanity and their experience in their roles with others, to provide support. And it opens hearts and souls to be in the relationships that sometimes are quite hard. I'm sure that's true in the educational world too.
That's right.
Did anyone else want to jump in there? We don't have any other, oh, maybe we have one more question in the chat. We do. Perfect. Thank you, Cailin Chismore, for getting that right in as I was about to say we didn't have questions in the chat. So Cailin asked, can you speak to perinatal and maternal mental health and the impact on children and early relational health?
I'll start, but
Yeah.
it's both emergently clear and self-evident to many that relational health starts even before pregnancy, but in pregnancy and perinatally. And everything we're now learning, that the well-being of a pregnant person in her network of supports around her, with the hope and the supports and the encouragements and the love and the humanity, protects her pregnancy, protects her own experience, helps her grow and heal from histories of trauma, but also is impactful to the next generation. So this relational connection, relational health framing is every bit as important prenatally, perinatally, postnatally, as those of us that would reduce to just early childhood thinking of children forward, forget the context of human development starts preconception. Then of course conceptually, and there's a continuum of the networks of relations, efforts and supports, and the powerful mechanisms involved of building health and healing and resiliency that start long before the birth of a darling little baby. So yes, maternal well-being and all the supports around a pregnant person that are both natural and then also cultural, as well as evolutionarily, likewise have to be captured or need to be captured to counter the isolation and the challenge we have in the birthing processes and patterns that have been more recently built.
I was going to add one thing there too, just very practically. I know there are places in the country, and I think I'm thinking of an example in Boston, but I'm not sure, where they're doing infant massage classes for mothers who are suffering with postnatal depression. And that is a beautiful way to bring these things together, that by helping the mother learn to be responsive to the baby and have those moments of pretty intense connection with infant massage, that actually treats depression for at least some profiles of maternal depression, while building the early relational health with the baby. And I think that's a beautiful idea of, let's find an activity that any parent could enjoy and benefit from, but particularly for parents who are struggling, it's a way to help bring about that connection in a way that might not be happening as naturally because of current obstacles in their mental health.
And Cailin, very practically, the doula movement, the community-based doula discovery, which has been generationally valuable to many cultures, but our culture now is seeing the value of those, the doula network supports that are both culturally specific, that lead with narrative of healing and trauma resiliency building, and the reality of a partner, trusted, safe, social presence and a birth experience has finally been recognized as a healing force and a promotes maternal well-being, but also has dramatic impacts on, the maternal birth experience, maternal health outcomes, and of course, the babies and perinatal outcomes for the mother and the baby. Capturing the relational, what is relationally embedded deeply in doula networks we say, dual networks naturally carry a relational health frame in all they do. And oh, lo and behold, that's been going on for generations and been a cultural practice for eons. But honoring the power of that truth into then dominant cultural thinking is really a dramatic shift.
Okay, well, this has been tremendous. The experience of writing this paper with all of you has been tremendous, and it's great to get to give our colleagues out in the world a little sneak peek into some of those deliberations and the thinking behind these principles. The paper will be out soon, and I'm actually putting a link in the chat. This is a link where you can request a certificate for participating today, but also you can check a box if you want me to send you the paper once it's on our website, and if you want to find out when our registration opens for this May 29th event. So does anyone have any last words as I bring up screen for the last few slides we're going to share?
I would only say share the paper broadly and widely, and join our Nurture Connection network on my website to sign on to, so that you can follow the movement of this good work over time.
Great, thank you. Okay, I will quickly share a couple updates from CSSP. I think many of you were on our website, on our webinar last month, where Charlyn was presenting about this paper that has since come out, expanding the perspectives and research foundation for the Strengthening Families and Youth Thrive framework. So I hope you will check that out if you haven't already. There will be more coming soon, research briefs about each protective factor being updated as we speak, additional research briefs going deeper on topics in the paper, updated core functions of implementation for those of you who are leading Strengthening Families work in your state or community, and many more supporting materials. So we are holding a virtual summit on May 29th. That date hopped around a little bit. So this is where we landed, May 29th. Our colleagues have exciting things happening with some of our partner organizations that we didn't want to conflict with. So we landed on May 29th. We are working on setting up the registration, but we hope you'll join us to learn more about the research behind that new paper, to hear from Strengthening Families partners and state leads, connect with other members of the network. We will have lots of time for interaction in those 4.5 hours. And we will be charging a $100 registration fee. We'll have details coming out soon about group discounts and some parent leader scholarships, but really hoping that a lot of you will join us and spend that time together digging in on Strengthening Families work. Also coming up in October, please save the date for the virtual virtual Together for Families conference. This year we have co-hosts from the US, Canada, and Ireland, who will all be bringing their unique work around family support and the threads that connect all of it. So I'm going to hand off to Maureen for an update from the Alliance before we wrap up here.
Thank you, Cailin. Just a really quick update. Our virtual April training of trainers is open for registration. If you are interested in becoming an Alliance certified trainer, you can visit the ctfalliance.org or contact me. I will put that in the chat box. And I just want to say, fantastic information. Thank you all so much for this work, and really looking forward to being able to integrate all of this into our training. And it's so relational to all of the Strengthening Families approach and the protective factors. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Maureen. And thanks again to Junlei, David, Charlyn, and Jenna. It's a great conversation. Hope people will grab that report when it comes out. And we look forward to further developing all of this work in the early relational health paradigm.
Thanks, everybody.